Welcome to Flatirons, where we seek to bring the awesome life of Christ to a lost and broken world. If you ever have any questions or want to learn a little bit more about us, just visit the website, flatironschurch.com. To stay connected with us throughout the week, just follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Today, Teaching Pastor Ben Foot kicks off our new series, Rough Crowd, and he looks at what lies beneath all of our fear, shame, and insecurity. The question, am I enough? We're glad you're here. Welcome to week 1 of Rough Crowd.
Oh my goodness. That's Nirvana at church. That's unreal. Oh my goodness. Every single time I get excited. My shins hurt because I'm trying to drum on the ground. It's just, I love it. Hey, someone who never gets enough thank yous is Ryan Gray, who's responsible for all the lights and stuff. Give it up for Ryan Gray. Good stuff. For the first 2 pages of my talk, all I can see is this diamond, printed in my vision. Let's get started. So welcome to the first week of Rough Crowd. I'm obviously excited about this series for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons I'm very excited about the series is we're going to hear stories from people in our seats. We're going to hear stories of what happens when God gets a hold of people like us, people who are part of a really rough crowd. I'm excited about it. And some of you might not be used to a pastor calling the church that he goes to a rough crowd, because a lot of us grew up in church, or we went to one just one time, or we saw the dude with the picket sign on the street corner, and it built up all this anger and bitterness toward Jesus and church and Christians in our life. And probably at the root of all of that is this idea of, we look at those people and we go, man, those people think they're perfect, and I know that they're not. That's my story, at least. That's the baggage that I grew up with. I grew up in that family. I went to church a billion times a week. I even went to a Christian private high school for a couple of years. And an example of this in my life, of this, me thinking they were hypocrites, an example would be, there's this dude who worked at my school. I really looked up to this guy. I really respected this guy. And at one point, he tells me, quote, he goes, "Hey, Ben, you'll never become a man if you don't play football." And I respected the guy. And so I'm like, well, I can't have that happen. So I played football in the summer. And actually, surprisingly, I was pummeled every single day. I was just absolutely pummeled. And so before the actual season started, I quit. I'm like, screw that. And I quit, but I felt shame because I believed the guy, right? So I'm like, I'm just going to be a boy. I guess I'm the kind of person who can't handle tough stuff. But then at the same time, that same guy, he was fired 6 months later for repeatedly sneaking off to the broom closet with the secretary. If you wink, if you don't know what I'm talking about, they weren't sweeping, all right? So he gets fired for that, and my brain started clicking, and I remember thinking a couple things. One of them was this. I remember thinking, okay, never again am I going to let a Christian make me feel shame for not living up to their standard when they can't even live up to their own. That's one thing I thought. The other thing I thought was, if this dude obviously needed so much help with his marriage and relationships and faithfulness to his wife, why did he pretend everything was perfect all the time? Isn't church supposed to be the place to go to when you have issues like that? And it is supposed to be that. But mine wasn't. The one I went to, you couldn't be honest about that stuff. And so I started to be furious at Christians. Eventually I was furious at God, even though it's not his fault. I shouldn't have been furious at him. I was just furious for a decade. And at the root of it, I went, these people who fill up rooms like this, they think they're perfect. And I know that they're not. But at the same time, here's something interesting. All right? It's very interesting. It's hard to grasp. It's a dilemma. And it's the reason I think that Christians sometimes feel like they're supposed to pretend to be perfect. Let me explain it, because if you just hear the first part, you'll want to leave, and you should leave. But let me explain the whole thing. Here's our dilemma. It's your dilemma, my dilemma, everyone's dilemma. It's this. Jesus actually does command you to be perfect. He does. He tells you to. He says it outright. He says it like this. He says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." I mean, you can't get more clear and concise, and it's just 2 words. Be perfect is what Jesus says. And it might seem overboard of Jesus at first, but think about this. Regardless of what you believe about God right now, just think about this. This is the standard you have for yourself. Right? Why would you ever feel regret or shame or insecurity or anything like that? Unless, like Scott talked about last week, you can't even live up to your own expectations. Maybe because your expectation of yourself is perfection. If that's the case, we can't blame a literally perfect God for looking at us and saying, you have to be perfect if you want to have a relationship with me. But at the same time, you know more than anyone else in the room that you fall short of perfection all of the time. There's not a single person in this room who, when I said, hey, God commands you to be perfect, not a single person in this room, when they heard that, they're like, okay, whew, sweet, check. You know, like perfection, no problem. You know, there's not a single person in the room who's like, I was afraid you were going to say that God commands me to be ambidextrous, and then I'm screwed. There's no one who was relieved when I said, God says be perfect. So that's our dilemma. God says be perfect, we can't. What do we do about it? Because if our only option is to show up here to Flatirons and hear that, and then you just like go home and try real hard for a couple hours until you fall apart, like, check, please. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that. But what if there is another option? And what if in reality, everything that we need to do has been done for you? Because you see, at just the right time when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. And God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So did Jesus die for us as soon as we achieved perfection? No, because that verse said that while we were still sinners, and sin is falling short of God, sin is our state of imperfection. So what that verse actually means is this: while we were still imperfect, Jesus died for us. Jesus loved you and died for you before you even had the chance to screw it all up in your head and think that you got to fix your whole life for him to like you. He did all that stuff for you before any of that. And when you put your faith in Jesus, he takes up residence in your life. And immediately he makes you perfect in the eyes of God. Meaning when God sees you, he sees Jesus. He sees the perfection that he demanded in the first place. And that's just the eternal grace that you get when you put your faith in Jesus. The here and now practical, in this day in life grace that you get is that Jesus leads you down this road towards perfection. That's called sanctification. Growth takes time. We talked about that in Tree of Life if you were here. And you might be going like me. You might be going, hey, listen, I can give you a laundry list of all the different ways that I was not like Jesus from today alone. And it's like, 11 in the morning. So how can God look at me and think that I'm perfect? And that's what's so incredible about God's grace. Because as Jesus leads you down this road towards perfection, towards becoming more and more like him, every single time you trip and you fall and you screw up, he gives you the grace you need to remain in him. And for him to remain in you, for him not to give up on you, and for you to remain perfect in God's eyes. It's hard to grasp. It's incredible. It's truly amazing grace. And what we're going to try and do over the course of this series is grasp that kind of amazing grace. And the way I'm wired, I have enough years of cynicism under my belt. I'm like, don't just talk about it, show it to me. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Here's what this kind of grace looks like.
My dad pointed something out to me. He's like, I don't know if you ever noticed, if you can hear it on the ice, but the sound of your skates carving through the ice and just echoing in the building. Those are NHL players, you can hear it. And he's like, my son is out there. I'm Jack Skilly. Been going to Flatirons for just over a year now. Professional hockey player. Moved out here from Madison, Wisconsin. So when I was 18, I was drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks, 7th overall. And I remember kind of sitting there going, looking at the projections before the draft and going, yeah, I could see myself going the 11th pick or even 9th to Ottawa. And you're trying to play it out. And then all of a sudden, the Blackhawks have the next pick. I got goosebumps thinking about it, but the camera crew came up right in front of me, and I was just like, no way, like it's gonna be me. And boom, that was it. They announced my name, I walk up the stage and it was such a surreal moment. Like, looking back on it, that was the moment when the hard work truly started. The expectations that were on me after I got drafted, they were extremely high, and nobody had higher expectations of myself than I did. So when I felt that outside pressure, I took it up 10 different notches. And I kind of had this expectation I put on myself that, I was drafted 7th overall. I need to light it up. And if I don't light it up, then I'm just not living up to the hype. And then you go into the pros out of college and you're not having success. I got sent down, and that was when all of the chatter began with the fans. When other people are saying that, hey, Jack Skilley's a bust, he's not living up to the hype of a 7th overall pick, what am I saying to myself? It's 10 times worse. I turned my back on God. I resented him for it. I was blaming him for everything that was going on. So I said, that's it, I'm doing it on my own. I don't need you. What I was saying to myself was, you're not good enough. You're never gonna be good enough. You are a bust. You've never been picked that high. You may never make it to the NHL. Most certainly won't be a full-timer. Like the worst messages. I was defeated before I even stepped on the ice. So I did that, failed, and I got to the point where I finally dropped to my knees and I prayed, God, I can't do this anymore. Please do something. This was God at work in my life, getting me out here, because my faith wouldn't be where it is without moving to Denver and being a part of Flatirons. Started trusting these men that were of the church and building relationships with these men that I had never had before. I started having friends outside of the game, real friends that I could talk to about real life scenarios, about God. I could talk about and hear them talk about their life with God. I always had this view that I wouldn't be liked outside of the hockey world for any other reason other than the fact that I play in the NHL. I said a prayer. It was, God, forgive me. Please forgive me for saying this, that, and that about myself. And help me love myself like you love me. Help me see that.
Can I ask you to maybe do something intense?
Sure.
If God walked through the front door right now, Jesus walked through the front door and said, in the midst of all the craziness, here's who Jack Skilley is.
If God walked through the front door, he'd say, Jack, you have a big heart. You have the ability to lead by example. And you're a strong, courageous person. And I get emotional because it's something that I should have told myself 22 years ago.
All right. Sitting there interviewing Skilley, and in my head I'm going, of all the people to have ever worn ice skates, he's in the top 1% of them. And it's still not enough. I sit there and I'm going, he replays hockey and all that stuff with all my own crap. He's telling my own life to me. It just blows my mind. It's not easy to do. To be that vulnerable and be that honest. He's in Ohio training right now. So Skilley, if you're watching online, we love you for that, man. Thanks. All right. This not feeling enough thing, it reminds me of myself a ton. And it reminds me actually of the guy that I had planned on talking about today for weeks. Because today I want to take a look at Jesus' friends. I want to take a look at, like, okay, who did Jesus hang out with? After a really long day, who did Jesus go get beer with at Buffalo Wild Wings? That's what I want to, that's what, just kidding. I know he would have Chick-fil-A. I know. And he doesn't drink beer. He drinks wine. He makes wine. I could talk all day long about how rough Jesus' 12 disciples are, and like they're just messed up people, his friends. But I want to talk about one specifically today. His name is Peter. I love this guy, and I'm learning a lot personally through Peter right now. So here's who Peter is. Totally normal, average guy. He's married. He doesn't have a formal education. He's a fisherman. You got to understand that fishermen in Jesus' time are about like fishermen in our time, and don't picture fly fishing, all right, because that's like the high art version of fishing, and that's not Peter. Peter's like the deadliest catch version of fishing. He's just like rough and crazy and fearless. Side note, it's just funny, every time you see Peter fishing in the Bible, he's not catching fish, like every single time. I was talking with Jim about this, and he goes, hey, he's actually more of a net thrower. And I was like, yeah, that's right. But that's Peter. He spends all day long on the water trying to catch fish while fighting to stay alive in the midst of these crazy storms that come out of nowhere. It's what the lake was known for. It could capsize the boat. So he's out there just like throwing caution to the wind and chanting piratey songs about life on the sea and drinking a PBR like a freaking champion. Like he's cool. He's a cool guy. And the first time Jesus meets Peter is actually after a long day of net throwing, and he hasn't caught anything. And so Peter's boat is docked, and he's cleaning the seaweed out of his empty nets. And Jesus climbs in Peter's boat and uses it as a stage to teach to the crowd. And when he's done, Jesus looks at just Peter and his buddies, and he goes, hey, how about you guys take the boat out to deep waters and throw the net in, and we'll catch some fish. And Peter's like, hey, I'm a professional net thrower, all right? So like, I've already done my job today. There's no fish out there. But here's how Peter responds. The verse says, so Peter rolled his eyes and put his PBR back in the cooler. I'm just kidding. I made that part up. It might be in the Message, though, if you... That's like such a church joke. That's lame. I'm sorry. Anyway, they go out to deep water, and they end up throwing the nets in, and they catch so many fish that their nets begin like splitting apart and breaking. It's a miracle. And so when Peter sees this, he immediately understands that Jesus is something totally different. Like Jesus is something very special. And so he has the reaction that every single imperfect person has ever had when they bump into perfection. Look at this. So when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." So in other words, Peter goes, listen, Jesus, you're too good and I'm too bad. You're too perfect and I'm too imperfect. So please just get away from me. Because if I have to spend a lot of time around you, if I have to hang around you much longer, then I'm just going to let you down. I'm not enough to be around you. But this is how Jesus responds to Peter. Look at this. Then Jesus said to Simon, that's Peter, says, don't be afraid. And from now on, you're going to catch men. And so they pulled their boats on shore and left everything and followed him. So Jesus' response is basically, hey, listen, Peter, I know you're not perfect. I want to be your friend anyway. I don't care. It's fine. And if you quit net throwing and you follow me, then I promise you're going to be shocked at the kind of things I'm going to do in your life. One day I'm going to make you and lead you into the kind of person who catches men, who brings other people to me. So quit making excuses and stop being afraid of your sinfulness. I'm not afraid of your sinfulness. And follow me. And so Peter followed him, and everything Peter did until Jesus died and came back to life, he did a bunch of stuff right and a bunch of stuff wrong, mostly because he's just this crazy sailor person who lives every single moment in the moment at 1,000 miles an hour. So sometimes that's good for Peter because it gets him in cool situations, like the one we just looked at, right? Like he up and left his family-owned fishing business like that just to follow Jesus. That's impulsive. Another time, Jesus is walking on water, which is, crazy to begin with. And Peter goes, hey, can I walk on water with you? Which is even crazier. And then Jesus says, sure. And Peter just jumps out the boat without thinking twice about it. That's crazy person stuff. Like, I'm on medication so that I don't jump out of boats on whims. And Peter just does it all the time. He's also the first out of all of Jesus' best friends to publicly declare, hey, Jesus, I think that you're the living Son of the living God. It's gutsy and outspoken. Just 1,000 miles an hour. Other times it's bad for Peter because he's also the only one of Jesus' friends to have ever chewed out Jesus. It did not go well for him. Another time he just reacts and cuts a dude's ear off, and Jesus has to be like, come on, Peter, and put it back. He puts it back on. It's true. It's in there. It's true that that's what it sounds like when you put an ear back on also. That's the noise. It's another story for another time. Actually, here's the story I want to tell you right now. It's the story of Peter's biggest 1,000-mile-an-hour gone wrong moment. It's just hours before Jesus is arrested. So here's our situation. It's Jesus and Peter and all of their friends, and they're at dinner. And Peter decides to brag. So Peter decides to show off to Jesus in front of all of his friends. And the way he does that is he goes, hey, so Jesus, I don't know about the rest of these knuckleheads, but me, I'd rather die than ever abandon you. So at least you always got me, is what he says. It's a big claim. And Jesus has tough news for him. Jesus looks back at him and goes, hey, Peter, so actually tonight, this very same night, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times and you're going to abandon me. And later that night, just like Jesus predicted, he's arrested and hauled off into court, and all of his friends, including Peter, scatter and hide because they don't want the same death sentence that Jesus is about to get. And the very same night, just like Jesus predicted, Peter's asked 3 times by total strangers, hey, aren't you buddies with Jesus? And 3 times, scared out of his mind, Peter replies, hey, I don't even know the guy, all right? Just leave me alone. And after that 3rd time of denying even knowing Jesus, here's what happens. Immediately a rooster crowed, and then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken just hours ago. Before the rooster crows, you're going to disown me 3 times. And so Peter went outside and wept bitterly. This loud, vulgar, strong man's man of a sailor, Peter, just collapsed on the ground weeping. And here's what I think Peter was so upset about. I think this is what's going on in his head. He's going, see, Jesus, I told you this would happen. I told you when I first met you. I told you I'd let you down. I'm too imperfect. I'm too rough of a person. I'm too selfish, too much of a liar, whatever. I told you to get away from me. I told you I'd let you down. I think that this moment for Peter is proof that he's not enough. And it leaves him collapse on the ground because Peter had a poor strategy for perfection. Here's what I mean. Remember, when Peter first meets Jesus, he looks at Jesus and he goes, get away from me. I'm not enough. And then Jesus goes, hey, stop being so scared of your own sinfulness. I'm not scared of it. I want to be friends anyway. In fact, I want to make you into something completely different. I want to make you perfect. And if Peter had stuck in that strategy for perfection for his whole life, life would have been great. But instead, almost immediately, Peter changes his perfection or his strategy from Jesus is going to make me perfect, and he changes it immediately to I need to make myself perfect. I need to prove myself worthy of being in the company of people like Jesus. And so I'm going to do or say the craziest, boldest thing I can think of, and maybe that will help me meet Jesus' expectations. Or in other words, Peter became the person who constantly asks, am I enough? Am I enough? I mean, why else? For real, why else would Peter be the one and only person to jump out of the boat and walk on water? And why else would Peter, in front of all of his friends, go, hey, Jesus, I would die for you? Why would he do any of that stuff? Unless he's just desperately trying to prove to himself and to others that he's enough, that he's not nobody. And what's more, Peter's strategy rests on his own power, so he's constantly failing, which just reinforces the message that he's not enough, which means tomorrow he has to try even harder and fail even bigger until to the point where he's jumping out of boats and saying he's going to die for people. And a lot of us in this room, let's just be honest, we heard Skilly on the video talking about not being enough, and it hit a little too close to home, and now some of us are starting to cave in on ourselves because we're realizing that the whole talk is going to be about this, and it gives us a stomach ache because this is the tape that's been in your head for as long as you can remember. You're not enough. You're not. Work harder. Go prove it because you are not enough. I mean, why else? Why else would you come home completely defeated when your coworker gets the promotion that you wanted? And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with dreaming big and wanting to advance your career and take care of your family, provide for them. But if you come home and feel like a loser because you did not get the promotion or whatever, fill in the blank, could it be because your strategy for perfection, for being enough, completely rests in your salary and your position and your performance? What about this for the moms in the room? Like, why else would you get furious when you see other moms posting pictures of how perfect their days were with their toddlers, just doing crafts and teaching them Latin? Right? And meanwhile, you're at home with your kids, like, how do I explain to you to stop crapping yourself, you know? For real though, like, honestly, why would it make you furious? Why would it make you sad? Unless your strategy for perfection, for being mom enough, completely rests in you having enough power to make your kids perfect. It's impossible. And you're definitely not alone here, all right? This is a Me Too moment for sure. In fact, I'll just go ahead and give you a snapshot of kind of where I'm at right now, because this whole am I enough thing has spun out of control in my life lately. So my strategy for perfection, unfortunately, has always been like how hard I work. My work ethic. So I'm constantly thinking to myself, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not enough. And so in a desperate attempt to prove that I'm enough, without even thinking about Jesus, which I work at a church, I go work myself into the ground. I go, come on, dude, you got to work harder than anybody else in the building because this is the only thing you have going for you. But then the thing with church is that my job is literally never done until Jesus walks through the doors one day. And so there's always another hour of work to put in. There's always another project I could take on, another coffee to grab with someone, another talk to write, a video to make. There's as much work as I want to have. And so I do too much. It's just Peter, 1,000 miles an hour, all the time trying to prove myself. And it's too much work to get done. So now my wife and my kids, they have dinner without me more than with me on a typical week. And when I do get home on time, I'm completely exhausted, right? Just crash on the couch, totally not present. And maybe you can relate to this, but here's how I wake up every morning, all right? I wake up a dad and a husband and a pastor, all right? Those are the things that I am. And just like Skilly said in the video, I'm defeated before my feet even hit the ground. It's like before I even eat breakfast, I've just convinced myself I'm not enough to be a good dad and a good pastor and a good husband. And then just to let you all the way in, I'm so glad this is the last time I have to say this. To let you all the way in, give you a full picture of where my headspace has been lately. I was incredibly humbled and thankful when Jim and Scott brought me onto the teaching team a few months ago. I love doing this. It's a surprise to me that I like doing it. It's one of the few things in my life where I feel very confirmed that God is leveraging a gift in me, like doing more than I could do on my own in me. But at the same time, the weight of responsibility goes up because I do not take this lightly. And then the expectations I put on myself go up, 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 up. When I was interviewing Skilly and he sits there and he goes, I had this expectation of I'm the number 7 overall draft pick. I have to go out and light it up. And if I don't, I'm letting everybody down. I'm like nodding my head because I've replaced hockey with this in my mind. And I had convinced myself that if I make one single mistake while writing or studying or teaching up on the stage, if I have to sit through one more rude email of someone who just doesn't like me for some reason, I'm going to break. And when I do, God himself is going to shake his head in disappointment. It doesn't even have to do with what you think about me. I think God himself is going to be sad he ever let me try it, and he's going to take it away from me as quickly and as surprisingly as he handed it to me. And so you can imagine how hard I took it when last Thursday, Jim pulls me into his office. He's got my talk in his hands, and I walk in, and I joke, and I go, do I got to rewrite the whole thing? And he goes, sit down. That's not good. So I sit down, and he goes, hey, listen, and he knows me really well. We're family. He knows my heart, and he knows the way, like my teaching style. So he goes, hey, listen, this whole section right here, pages, like just pages. He goes, this whole section right here, I understand what you're trying to say, and what you're trying to say is good, but you're communicating it so poorly that it's coming across as false theology. You have to go rewrite the whole thing Thursday. And he left me in his office to rewrite, and I'm sitting there. I have a Peter moment where I'm embarrassed to admit it, but literally in tears, and I'm going, God, I told you this would happen. I've been telling you for months now. I'm going to let you down. I am just the wrong man for the job. Listen, I never went to school for this, ever. I mean, I'm not even ordained yet. It's on the calendar, but I mean, I'm not. I never went to school for it. It was never the plan or trajectory for my life to even work at a church, let alone to teach at one. I have more years under my belt of being furious at God than following him. And so I'm sitting in this office and I'm going, God, I told you I would let you down. It's happening right now. I'm not enough. And I don't know a single other church where the teaching pastor would admit that he almost accidentally taught you heresy, almost. Which I think is a funny slogan for the website. Flat irons. Where we sometimes almost teach you heresy. We don't, but it gets close sometimes. It's long right now. I need to pare it down. But I'm just being honest with you. That's where I'm at. And here's the reason I tell it to you is because it train wrecked me. It train wrecked me. I mean, I realized that until today, honestly, I walk up those 6 steps. I walk up those 6 steps on my own. Until today, I've walked up those steps thinking, you're up there on your own, dude. Don't let people down. Because my strategy for perfection, for being a good father, dad, and pastor is to do it on my own power, alone. And so here's my question. What is your strategy? What's yours? What makes you feel like enough? When you don't have it, then you don't feel like enough. What is that for you? What is your strategy for perfection? Fill in the blank. And then let me ask you, is it working? Because I wouldn't be surprised if for most of us in this room, if not all of us in this room, at night when you're in bed and the lights are off and there's no one to pretend for anymore and you're just completely chained to your honest to God thoughts, I bet at the root of all your fear and your insecurity and your shame and everything is one question, which is, am I enough? So what do we do about that? And maybe we start here. At least this is what God has been walking me through since Thursday. There's this great moment after Jesus' death where Peter and some of the guys are out trying to fish. Because when Peter had the hopeless moment, when Peter has that moment of looking at God going, see, I told you I would let you down. This is me not being enough. After he has that hopeless moment, he does what we all do. He just goes back to the only thing he knows, which is how to not catch fish. And so he's out in this boat, and then Jesus, completely and physically resurrected, walks up on the shore, and he brings the boat. He goes, hey, come on in here. And when they get close enough, Peter realizes that it's Jesus, and he freaks out. You would too. And he goes, he's back, and he jumps out of the boat to let the other guys handle the nets and all that stuff. He just jumps out of the boat and swims to shore because in Peter's mind, there's a clean-up conversation he needs to have with Jesus right now. And everyone gets to shore, and Jesus cooks up some fish, and they have what I'm assuming is the most surreal breakfast of all time, right? I don't know what they talked about. So how was being dead? Just a weird breakfast. And then after that, here's the part I love so much. After that, Jesus looks at Peter, and he goes, hey, just you and me. Let's go for a walk. So it's just the two of them, and Jesus asks Peter, he goes, hey, Peter, do you love me? And Peter goes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? And Peter replies 3 times the same exact way. And Jesus knows Peter loves him. Jesus isn't double checking or trying to bring up some bad memories and put him on a guilt trip. Instead, it's almost like Jesus just knows and loves Peter really well and realizes all Peter needs is to eat a good meal and go for a walk with Jesus and make some bold claims again that are true this time. So he lets Peter say it out loud, and then after that, Jesus looks at Peter and says this. He goes, okay, I know you love me. You don't have to tell me. And now you're going to go catch men like I told you you would. Now you're going to go and you're going to start this revolution, this thing called church. It's going to be incredible. That's a huge task. And also, those are very intimidating words if Jesus expects Peter to be strategic and passionate and brave enough on his own power to kick off church as we know it today. But what's great is that Jesus does not expect that. And actually, Jesus tells Peter, after he goes, hey, here's what I'm going to do in your life, he says the same exact thing that he told Peter way back when he first met him, and Peter said, get away from me, I'm not enough. Look at this. Then Jesus said to Peter, follow me. You don't need to go first. You don't need to figure it out on your own. Here's what I'm going to do through you. Now just follow me. Jesus does not expect Peter to be enough on his own. Instead, Jesus expects to be enough for Peter. And a few days later, Peter and the disciples received the Holy Spirit. It's the living Spirit of Jesus living inside of them and me and us, leading them and making them enough. And Peter immediately marches back into the same part of the city that he was hiding from just days ago. And he preaches a sermon that makes 3,000 people become Christians in one day. That's a good talk. And then Jesus leads Peter to become the head and lead of the church in Jerusalem and to start church. This, in the face of persecution that we can't even understand in our cultural context right now. And in fact, Peter, the same guy who said, Jesus, you have to get away from me. I'm not enough to even stand next to you. That same Peter is eventually murdered on a cross for looking and being too much like Jesus. You can't find a more radically changed life than Peter. And the same Holy Spirit that radically changed Peter is still alive and active and can radically change your life. But I have enough years of cynicism in my life to go, hey, sounds cool, but how? How? How does that happen? And here's how it happens. It's the number one thing I need to learn from Peter right now, and maybe you too. Because for most of Peter's life, he's been asking the wrong question. Peter was asking, am I enough? And that question leaves Peter and us, anytime we ask it, it leaves us unfulfilled. And the reason it leaves us unfulfilled, the reason it left Peter unfulfilled, is because Jesus is never going to tell Peter what Peter thinks he wants to hear. Ever. Jesus is never going to tell Peter that Peter is enough. I mean, that would make Jesus bad or wrong, or at the very least, it would make him a liar who's more concerned with making Peter feel warm and fuzzy for 5 minutes than he is concerned with fixing Peter's everything. And it goes back to our dilemma, which is this. Jesus isn't going to tell Peter he's enough because Peter isn't. But at the same time, Peter needs to be perfect to have a relationship with Jesus. What's the solution? And Peter stumbled upon the solution to the dilemma because eventually Peter quit asking, am I enough? And instead he started asking, is Jesus enough? Or in other words, is Jesus enough to make me enough? He changed his strategy for perfection, which is what we need to do too. We need someone to literally do this for us. We need someone to literally take up residence in our lives and represent us on our behalf to God and transform us into perfection in the eyes of God. We're not strong enough on our own. And then we need someone in the here and now, practical, life today. We need someone who loves us enough to walk us down this road towards perfection so that we're not constantly stuck in all of our old failures and all of our disappointment. And on top of all of this, we need someone to cover us every single time we stumble and fall and screw up along this road. And Jesus swears he's enough. Here's how he says it to a guy named Paul. He says this. He says, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is enough for you. Plus, my power is made perfect in your weakness. And if we want any shot at becoming more like the people we want to be, if we want any shot of life without this terrible, am I enough question haunting every single moment, then it means our strategy for perfection has to become Jesus, because Jesus says he's enough to make you enough. And when we let him do that, he radically changes our lives. Here's a picture of what that radical change looks like from Peter. So after Peter teaches that sermon I told you about, where 3,000 people become Christians, after that, here's the crowd's reaction to it. Look at this on the screen. So he says this, and the Bible says this. So when they, and they is a crowd of people who knew who Peter used to be, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized these are just unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. He wants to change your life so much it will shock you and your friends and your family. And all of this is good news for us, because it means Jesus is saying, hey, stop trying to be a parent on your own power. You thought it had to do with reading the right book, or like getting them into preschool at the right time, and what kind of discipline, and we got to get them through high school without smoking weed or whatever, and they can never get arrested. Like, you thought that's what parenting was. And he's going, just shut up and follow me. And if you do, I'm going to make you into the kind of mom and the kind of dad, and fill in the blank, the kind of boss, the kind of employee, the kind of friend, the kind of boyfriend, the kind of girlfriend that will shock you. I promise. I'm saying this from Ben Foot's personal life right now. You'll look back just 6 years ago and go, I cannot believe what he's doing with me. It will shock you. It will shock your friends, and it'll shock your family. The problem is when we screw up, we usually look at ourselves, right? We look at ourselves and we go, see, God, I told you I'm not enough. When in reality, what we're supposed to do is when we screw up, we look at him and we basically challenge him and ask him and go, are you still enough? Are you still enough to cover that? Because that's how rough I am, and it's probably going to get worse. Are you enough? Are you going to bail? And he will always look at you and say, I'm right here, and I'm enough. And that's what this whole series is all about, because I don't know about you, but that is the kind of church I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of a rough crowd that is being made perfect. He's changing us so much that it's shocking our friends and our family and ourselves. I want to be a part of a rough crowd that we're messy, we're broken, we still make mistakes, but because of Jesus, we're changing. I mean, this is a Me Too place, which means I can walk up to you in the lobby and go, hey, dude, your life's still a train wreck? Yeah, me too. But then at the same time go, hey, at the same time, is Jesus still your only hope? Your only strategy for perfection? Yeah, me too. Which means we can't throw stones at one another. What right do I have to make you feel guilt or shame for anything you've ever done in your life? I'm not your God. I'm not your judge. I won't do that, ever. And we won't do that here. And next week, we'll come in here and we'll dig into the details of what does this new strategy for perfection look like, practically, like what is step one? But until then, in case you didn't know, or in case you need reminded, or in case it's your very first time sitting in the seat, this is who Flatirons is. We are a rough crowd of people who can honestly say, yeah, I'm addicted still, and I'm selfish, and I'm repetitive, I'm habitual, I'm lonely, I'm depressed, I'm honestly stupid sometimes, and I'm sinful. Guess what else I am? Saved. Amen. I'm not just saved, I'm perfect in the eyes of my God because of what Jesus has done for me. And guess what else I'm not? I'm not the man I used to be. So much so that it is shocking me. That's who this place is. That's what Flatirons is. That's what the next few weeks are all about. Because we might be a rough crowd, but listen, we are a rough crowd that he is making perfect. Pray with me. God, I thank you for, thankful for a lot. I thank you for this crowd, this very rough crowd of people in here. God, I thank you for your patience. And I thank you for your grace and your mercy and your love for us. God, I thank you that I can stand on this stage and you know me. You know my darkest, deepest, you know me. And you still look at me and you go, hey, it's all right. It's covered, it's paid for, it's fine. I'm thankful for that. I mean, it leaves me the only person sitting around being angry at myself, for myself, and being afraid of my own sinfulness. God, please help us in this room to move past that. God, what I'm praying is over the course of the next few weeks for all of us in this room, God, bring some new people in here so they can hear this good news. And then, God, teach the people who have been in this room for years new things. Break us and put us back together again. God, most of all, thank you for this place where we can be honest, talk about you in a real way. And God, thank you so much for taking just jacked up people like us and doing incredible things through us. You glorify yourself in that way, and I'm thankful for it. I worship you for it, and I love you so much for it. I pray it in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
We're so glad that you joined us today, and it's our honor and our mission to help you connect with Jesus in a real and authentic way. If you need prayer for anything, you can just head to our website, flatirons.church.com/prayer, and you can know that our team of volunteers will be praying for you all throughout the week. We'd love to hear about the awesome things that Jesus is doing in your life, and so email us at mystory@flatironschurch.com. We'd love to hear about what Jesus is doing in your life. And if you believe in what God is doing here around Flatirons, you can always donate to our mission at flatironschurch.com/giveonline. Thanks again for joining us this week, and we'll see you right back here next week.